Hello. One of my favorite kinds of reading experiences is getting lost in a great big family saga of following individuals over multiple generations. So, as I mentioned in a video I made about the current Booker Prize long list, I was doubly excited when I opened up Kiran Desai's new novel, The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny, because at the very beginning of this book is not one family tree, but two, and we follow the generations of both of the main protagonists of this novel. And so now I have read all 670 pages of this great big epic, Kiran Desai's first novel in nearly 20 years since her previous novel, The Inheritance of Lost, which did win the Booker Prize in 2006. And so I want to give my thoughts and feelings about it and what I think are the positive and negative aspects of this novel. And I'm going to avoid giving spoilers as much as possible. I will be talking about some spoilers later on in this video, but I will mark out very clearly when I'm going to start discussing spoilers. So if you want to stop watching and come back to this later. And I also really want to give you a bit of advice, which I wish I had known before going into reading this novel, and I was somewhat uncertain about whether I should read this book yet because it hasn't been published yet. It is due to be published at the end of September, and generally I don't like reading books before they actually come out because one of my favorite parts of reading is discussing it with other readers, and if most readers don't have access to it, generally I don't like reading a book before it's actually come out. But I did have responses from a couple of viewers that said they were really interested in my thoughts about this, and I am glad that I have read this now. I mean, partly because I did mostly really enjoy it, and I got thoroughly immersed in the lives of these characters over such a long period of time. But also, yes, I do want to give this little bit of advice because when I started reading this book, I was uncertain if I wanted to continue on with it because one of the storylines which were almost immediately introduced concerns aspiring novelist Sonia, and she gets involved in a relationship with a much older, who's like 30 plus years older than her, a man named Ilan, who is a wealthy, controlling artist. And I feel like there have been multiple stories and novels about intelligent young women that get involved in romantic relationships and get manipulated by older men. And so I was slightly uncertain, like, oh, if this is the main part of the novel, whether I want to continue on reading it. But there's a part in the book in which Kiran Desai writes, if Sonia managed to write the story of herself and Ilan, it would fall into a tedious stereotype of older monster male artist and young aspiring female artist, a story that kept on being repeated ad nauseum. And so I think one of the things that the author is doing in this novel is interrogating these familiar tropes in storytelling, and especially concerning Sonia as an aspiring writer, as an aspiring novelist. She becomes very self-conscious about this and is made to feel this way early on in her writing career of the subject matter of her stories, not only concerning her relationship with this older man, but also what are seen as familiar Orientalist tropes of stories that concern arranged marriages and magic realism. And Sonia kind of gets in her head about this and starts self-censoring herself and how she writes, what the subject matter, what she's actually writing about. And Kiran Desai, partly she is giving us this story because we get a long novel about a bungled, arranged marriage and kind of clumsily attempted arranged marriage, and also a demonic dog that pursues one of the characters, and so there is this slight fantastical element to the story. Most of it is very grounded in realism, but there is also this a story about an amulet and kind of demonic curse. And so, yeah, the author, I think, is getting us to think about these familiar tropes in fiction and considering why they do keep occurring, with the relationship between Sonia and this older man. These relationships keep happening, despite some social progress and feminism, that young women keep falling under the sway of older men, and so I think Kiran Desai is asking, why does this keep occurring? Because it does, and so it's still relevant to be discussed and talked about, as well as the immigrant story, and so we follow Sonia and Sunny, who at the very beginning of the novel, they were born and raised in India, but they have been living in the United States, and it follows their journey over a long period of time as they struggle with issues of feelings of isolation, of feelings of expectation, which are placed upon them by their families back in India, with experiences of racism, and they and practical issues of if they want to continue living in the U.S., how can they continue doing so? And so it explores a number of these different topics and issues from in quite a unique way, and I think this story does take a unique stance on these familiar tropes and storylines, while also kind of interrogating why we think of them as kind of stereotypes, and so I think it's really clever and has multiple levels to the story in this way. One of the things that I liked most about reading this novel was really getting to know the characters over a sustained period of time. I felt like they were very familiar to me by the end of the book, and now that I've stopped reading it, I do kind of miss them and keep thinking about them. It took me about 2 weeks to read this novel, and I feel like that's a good period of time when I've spent so much time following these characters' journeys and the dramas of their lives and the dramas between each other, and I feel like there's a lot of tragic comic humor that comes out of the interactions between these individuals. One of the things I liked most was the interactions that Sonia and Sunny have with their parents and their grandparents, and so you can see the tensions between these different generations that have had to deal with different issues and things of Sonia and Sunny, who are dealing with the experience of being immigrants to a new country, but also then there are their grandparents who experienced the effects of the end of World War II and partition, and a lot of cultural tensions that Sonia and Sunny don't have to deal with in exactly the same way. And I felt like Sonia and Sunny were really interesting characters in and of themselves, and part of the story is a romance, but it is not a romance in the way that you would expect, or at least that's not the central point of the story. The question isn't so much will they or won't they get together, but it's more following their professional experiences and aspirations of Sonia as an aspiring novelist, and Sunny as a journalist who is struggling with his position and figuring out what he wants to write about and what he is pressured to write about as a journalist, and following those professional struggles of the characters, I thought was really interesting and compelling, as well as all of the personal details that they are dealing with in their relationships and their family connections over a long period of time. But there are also a lot of really fascinating peripheral characters. So there's Mina Foy, who is Sonia's aunt, who has been kind of branded a bad luck daughter early on in her life. She was branded this way and has had to basically live with this label for her entire life in a really tragic and sad way, and it's really interesting following the trajectory of her character. And there's also Satya, who is Sunny's longtime friend, that they've been friends since they were younger. And Satya has also moved to the United States. He's becoming a doctor, and he is struggling with his own issues of loneliness as well, and wants to return to India to marry and bring a bride back to the United States. And his story and his friendship with Sunny is really fascinating as well. And there's also the character of Babita, who's probably my favorite character in this novel. She is Sunny's mother, and she is very entitled in a lot of ways. She lives off from the inherited wealth of her family, and she has a lot of non-politically correct opinions, and she makes these known, and she is a kind of domineering figure that I love to read about in fiction. I would never want to meet her in real life, but I really enjoy reading about her. And I also feel like her character is handled in a really interesting way. Her storyline is really fascinating. There's a hilarious part when it's recalled that Babita once was at a French embassy and she stole a round of camembert cheese because she just loves cheese. And there are also a few different gay characters that are kind of peripheral characters that become friends of some of the main characters in the family, and I really appreciated those characters as well, because they're all treated in a very individual way. They're all very different from each other, and they are all interesting. So I became very invested in all of their lives. And also, one of the things I most appreciated about this novel, as the title would suggest, is the way this novel probes the meaning of loneliness and how loneliness manifests in many different ways. So at the very beginning of the novel, we're confronted with how Sonia feels so lonely in her position of where she is in America. And it's something that I was surprised that I identified with so strongly, because she is going to a college in Vermont during the winter time, and it starts during the winter time when the school season is off, and so just she and a couple other international students are left there because they aren't able to afford to go back to their homes, so they have to continue on in this campus that is pretty much deserted and completely covered in snow. And this was an experience I had very much, because I also went to college for a short period in Vermont, and experienced the solitude of being in a relatively isolated place in somewhere that is completely covered in snow. And Sonia works in a library, and I spent so much time in the university library during this time when I was lonely and wandering around between the stacks, and that was how I first discovered my favorite novel of all time, The Waves by Virginia Woolf, and I just started reading that, and it felt like this outlet and picture of the worlds that I had never experienced before, and so that became, my favorite book of all time. But also, I felt this sensation of loneliness so strongly while I was there. But it doesn't just explore the loneliness of these the central characters in this way. It follows different kinds of loneliness of Sunny's mother, Babita, who Sunny kind of lies to her about what he's doing a lot of the time, and she realizes that. So it's remarked at one point the loneliness that a parent feels of having this gap between their child, who they used to confide in about everything, but now they know that that child is withholding a lot of things from them, and so feeling this distance from the child that a parent experiences, and waiting for the child to own up to what they've actually been doing and to confide in the parent. And Sonia also becomes aware that her sense of loneliness is quite relative, that there are other much more severe forms of loneliness that people experience that are enforced upon them. There are people that are put in solitary confinement in prison, and that kind of loneliness is kind of unimaginable for so many of us. And there is the loneliness of, she meets another character that has come from a country where she was living under a dictatorship, and the loneliness that she experienced, knowing that if she talked about what she was really thinking and feeling with her friends and family, that those intimate people in her lives might tell on the government about her, and so the sense that you're not able to reveal yourself to the people that are closest to you in your life, and the isolation and loneliness of that as well. And there is also a form of enforced loneliness that comes with a kind of public condemnation that is shown in the story when individuals don't conform to what is expected by the community and the public, and they might be condemned and say, well, that person deserves to be alone for the rest of their life, and there's such a cruelty to this, of this sense of the public that want to see someone isolated in this way, and we'll see that this is enforced. And so I really appreciated this contemplation of different forms of loneliness and how this takes place. And I also really enjoyed how there were a lot of literary references in this. At one point, Sonia is reading the Japanese novel Snow Country, and she doesn't read the book in its entirety, but she describes it as her favorite book of all time. And this sense that she doesn't want to spoil the experience, because it feels like such a perfect book to her, of having the actual experience of reading it, and the kind of contradiction of that. I like how that's playfully presented. Also, there's a quote, it's remarked at one point, that when Dickens is better than your life, then why live your life? And I mean, I often feel that in reading books, that I mean, the experience that I find in books is so rich and fascinating, and so different from my own, small circumscribed life, that why wouldn't I just be reading all of the time? Also, Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express is referenced later on in the book. Actually, the movie, not the book, but is brought, the kind of plot of that is then brought into the story in a way that became really poignant, in a way that I found really surprising. I thought that was really inventive, how she sort of integrated that into the story. And there was also another quote that I quite liked, where she writes, "Were writers who embodied and illuminated their times eventually condemned by the more enlightened future they themselves helped bring into being?" And I think this is such an interesting question in fiction, especially when going back and reading older books from 50 or 100 or 200 years ago, and criticizing the morals of those books, and things about those books that have become non-politically correct and are now condemned for being so. But at the time, they were quite enlightened in their views, and so I feel like there's this tension in reading which continues to be explored. And so yeah, I liked how not just literature was referenced quite a lot in this book, but also the meaning of what we read and the process of reading and how we understand it. And I think the novel takes a quite unique approach to discussing relationships and love. And so there was another quote that I thought was really meaningful when she writes, she thought that this was what people spoke of when they spoke about love. You were outwardly more adult and treated with greater consideration, but secretly you were more childlike, more free, more full of laughter. And I feel like that is so much about what the experience of being in a real loving and close relationship is like. That outwardly, you have this identity of being, I am in a relationship, and everything that entails. But then in intimate moments, you can be more of yourself and reveal the more tender aspects of yourself than you would normally to other people that you encounter in your life. And I thought that was really beautifully encapsulated in this story. But then on the flip side of that, I thought it was really powerful how this novel presents the life of a single woman. And so at one point, Sonia is by herself going through this community in India and feeling all of the pressure from people around her, of men that are continuously asking her, oh, why are you on your own? Where is your husband? What are you doing here? And questioning her so relentlessly that she doesn't feel like she is able to be herself at all, or have any freedom, that she becomes so isolated because of this public criticism and following after her. At one point, it's remarked that a woman must stay alone for a long while until the hate men have for women has left her, and even longer until the jealousy women have for other women has left her. And so it gives this sense of being a woman in the world, and the expectations and perilous state that women, especially single women, are in, and how having a state of aloneness can be nurturing and sustaining. An aspect of the novel that I found surprising and fascinating is that it's partly set in Mexico, which I wasn't expecting, and which I think is so interesting because Kiran Desai's mother, Anita Desai, who is also a very famous writer, has written multiple books that are set in Mexico. And I found this interview between Kiran and Anita from almost 15 years ago, and I'll put a link to that below because it's so interesting hearing them discuss writing together, and these generational tensions between them, and how they're dealing with different things. But at one point, Anita remarks, Mexico was different. It was such a strange experience, so entirely new, never having learned anything about it living in India. I set off with the intent of exploring it and found so much deeply familiar, with close connections between the Indian and Mexican that was also, of course, an Indian world. And I feel like Kiran Desai is exploring this tension in the novel, and so is almost kind of continuing on with what her mother has done. There is so much more that I appreciated and enjoyed about this novel, and that I could keep talking about, because I did find this story consistently engaging all the way through for hundreds of pages, and I don't regret that the novel was that long. I mean, certainly there were some sections which maybe dragged a bit more than others and could have been edited down a bit, but I feel like overall that it was all a worthwhile experience, and I was glad to go on the journey. But there were some aspects of the book that I felt slightly more critical of, and I want to discuss that now, although that will involve some spoilers. So if you have not read this book yet, and if you don't want to have any spoilers before going into reading it, then you might want to stop watching this video now and either come back to it later on or not if you don't want to. But yeah, I will get into some spoiler territory now, because some of the aspects I feel critical of, even though I know the author was trying to interrogate and subvert this idea of familiar tropes and storytelling, the way that the story circles back to Ilan and Sonia's relationship with this older man and how he re-enters into the story. I was slightly sad that he came back into the story, because I thought, like, oh, hopefully we're just done with him. And the way both he re-enters into the story when Sonia and Sunny are on holiday in Italy and suddenly come across this exhibit that is being put on by him, and there is the coincidental thing of how Sonia and Sunny meet each other for the first time in person on this train in India. And I found that coincidence surprising and satisfying. But then when there's the coincidence that she and Sunny are away like this, it felt like pushing the kind of coincidence in a story a bit too far, that he just happens to be there, not only having an exhibit on, but having a lecture, about to be given a lecture, and how this creates a rupture in their relationship to each other, and it slightly truncated that section. It just kind of ends quite abruptly, and I found that with a few of the different sections in this novel, that they just kind of stop quite abruptly. Even though it is such a long novel, I was kind of like, oh, but don't you have more to say on that scene or that subject matter? And the way that the storyline plays out, that there is this demonic dog chasing Sonia in this way, that didn't entirely work for me. I felt like even if you could just like take this as a manifestation of the trauma that Sonia experienced, living in this relationship and having this this self-critical sense that has been instilled upon her by Ilan, that having this dog manifest itself in this way, and saying, oh no, that the dog must have really existed, because there were teeth marks in Sunny's something of Sunny's, and that just felt like and the whole quest to retrieve the amulet, that it just felt like that was pushing the story in a way that felt like a bit forced to me, and just didn't completely work for me. And so that's some of my main criticism of this novel. But like I said, the overall, I think it is so compelling and inventive what she is doing in this novel, and creates a largely enjoyable experience, and so fascinating how it looks at these different members of the generation, and then asking the question of what these individuals of Sonia and Sunny are going to do in the present day, and following what is going to happen with them, especially Sunny's relationship with Babita. I thought that was really interesting, and then how Sonia develops this surprising connection with her as she goes to stay in her home in Goa, and so I did really enjoy this novel overall, and I think it's a really worthwhile experience spending so much time with it, and so I would love to hear if when you do get to read this novel, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, if you agree with me or disagree with me, or are there any other aspects of the story you want to talk about. I would love to do that with you in the comments below, or if you're interested or excited about reading it now, please let me know about that as well. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye.